don't we give a lovely warm round of applause to our next speaker, Colm Hillard.
Thanks, Ruth. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I suppose as a young person, I thought when I'd first get a chance to speak in Croke Park, it would begin with the words Tá Nahasarum, but anyway, that's not going to happen anytime soon. The startup of our company was in 2015, and it was under the name of PC Immigration Ireland. That effectively means that it's Paul and Colm, there's where the PC comes from. So we retired, as Ruth said, from the Garda National Immigration Bureau after spending 33.5 years working there. And we decided to go into the private sector in terms of immigration consultancy practice. At that time, we were covering general immigration issues that we say a lot of people are familiar with. Some people in the audience may not be familiar with, but without being specific, it was general immigration. So in 2018, we established Work Permits Ireland, which pretty much says what it does on the tin. It's a company designated solely to dealing with the application process and the gathering of information in terms of work permits for non-EU citizens to allow them to work in Ireland. So Work Permits Ireland, when it was established, it wasn't with a view of reinventing the wheel. It was more or less just making sure that that wheel was round and that all the information added up to a smooth landing. So I have to just go back slightly in terms of years, and when I go back, I'm going back to nearly 1 year post-war, which was 1946. Ireland was only used to one piece of legislation, and it was known as the Aliens Order Act. Believe it or not, aliens. That's what used to be referred to as somebody who wasn't a naturalised or a citizen born in Ireland. So the next legislation we had dealing with anybody coming from Ireland was 1996. So we had a period of 50 years where there was no legislation, and then from 1996 to 2015, a raft of legislation came into play. In 1997, both myself and Paul, we were assigned to immigration duties. So we were lucky in that sense that we were like two sponges being put into an ocean. All that information, all that legislation was coming forward, and we were able to soak it up, and hence we brought it forward to today. Now, in terms of work permits and employment permits, 2003 was the first legislation that we had in Ireland governing such aspects, both for employees and employers. There were work permits before that, but they were dealt with under the general law that we had that I spoke of from 1946 up to 2003. So with the regulations, it came along that we had the permits regulations subsequent 2006, the most recent ones on the 22nd of April 2019, some of you might be aware, have expanded the number of eligible employments and brought some of the eligible employments up to another term, which I'm going to get to in the next couple of minutes. So I'm just going to move briefly through the employment permit types. And I've specifically put these together because they're going to be very applicable to the employee, because the following permits will give a person reckonable residence in terms of future in Ireland. So the first one is critical skills employment permit, and in terms of critical skills employment permit, it comes with a degree, so a level 7 or higher qualification. That can sometimes come in different forms from different countries, but once it translates into level 7 or higher and it's associated with the employment, then it qualifies for critical skills. There may also be at times where you have somebody who is in a particular field, like accountancy, then you have to be registered with the appropriate Irish association of that. The general permit, the difference in that is that you don't need the qualification of degree level. It's nearly always based on relevant experience. In some cases it can be 2 years, And if you like to take, for instance, in terms of outside the construction industry, that can equate to 4 and 5 years, depending on the type of work that you're getting into. But again, it's going to be based on legitimate references that you can provide in terms of previous employers. Those employers can obviously be anywhere in the world, but once they're legitimate references and can be checked with the referee, then there's no problem with them. There's sometimes, and I come to the third item there, is a reactivation permit. So sometimes when a person is issued with either critical skills or a general permit, and from an employee's point of view, you may discover that the employer that you signed up to is not exactly, they're not doing what you want them to do. In other words, if you're employed as an engineer and you discover when you go to the building site, they hand you a wheelbarrow and a shovel, that's not what you're employed as. So in that terms, you can get out of the contract of that permit and you can then look to get what's known as a reactivation with another employer. That also works for the employer, because sometimes an employer can hire somebody with great CVs, great interview skills, and everything is ticking all the boxes. And again, in the reverse situation, when they bring that person onto the building site and they have him down as, let's say, a crane driver, and they discover that that person couldn't drive a nail, well, then we have a problem. So the employer can then look for revocation and look for a new permit. So that's just covering that there. The other type of permit is the dependent partner and spouse employment permit applications. Now, up until the 22nd of April, we had a situation where those on critical skills could ask their dependent partner or spouse to come into Ireland, and they had to apply for one of those permits. That has changed since the 22nd of April. Your spouse or your partner or dependent can now come to Ireland and register on the back of your permission. In other words, they now get permission to go into full-time employment in any type of work. There's no restrictions. The one thing they would have to do is work a minimum of 10 hours on the minimum wage. But it's all based on the critical skills permit holder retaining their permission and retaining their employment. So we look at the following ones, and these are categorized in such a way that they don't give you a reckonable residency. In other words, just explain a little bit more about the reckonable residency. On permits you get stamp 1, and you're looking for that to carry towards 5 years reckonable residency so that you qualify for either a long-term residency or an Irish passport, either or the other. But the one that we have here in front of us is in terms of non-reckonable. So in other words, you get stamp 1, but you don't get that to carry forward to count as citizenship. And they're basically for key components coming in to work for companies, like an intercompany transfer based on senior management or maybe somebody who's bringing new initiatives into the company in terms of IT or maybe some project analysis, and their salary is going to be on 40,000 a year. The contract for services employment as well, again you will get stamp 1 permission on that, but you're not going to get reckonable service in terms of your application process for long-term residency. The other one that's there is the exchange agreement employment permit, and it's basically, again, it's an exchange agreement between the company here in Ireland, and we say if they have a sister company in another company like America, could be any country outside of the EU, and you're coming here as part of a 6-month program or a 24-month program, okay? So all of the ones above there, they vary from 6 months to 24 months. And again, it's going to depend on the type of work that you're going to be doing. So we're talking about the residence permission. Again, I'm going to go back to the 2 main types of permits. The first one I mentioned was the critical skills permit. You get what's known as a stamp 1 immigration permission. And just the important thing to know is that the people who issue the employment permits that's the Department of Business and Enterprise. The people who issue the residence permit is the Irish Naturalisation and Immigration Service, which is under the Department of Justice. So two different government departments, but you need the critical skills permit to register with Innis, who are based in Burkey. So you get a stamp 1 and you get a permission for 2 years, but you will get the first stamp is issued for 1 year. The reason for that is you must go back to the Immigration Authority, Innis, show them that you've complied with the permit for 12 months. You do that by getting a letter from your employer, which shows that you're still employed. You show your P60 to show that you've conformed with the salary details and your most recent pay slips and proof that you're still living in the country, such as utility bills. So then you get your second year permission, and based on that then you get what's known as a compliance letter. The compliance letter is applied for to the Department of Business and Enterprise. They see that you complied with the terms and conditions of the employment permit. When they issue you with that compliance letter, you then look to the Department of Justice, Innis, to get what's known as a stamp 4. Once you get the stamp 4, you're entitled to work with any employer. You don't have to stay with the same employer. However, you might want to stay with the same employer, but you can now work in any type of work. So you're not restricted to your qualifications. If you decide you want to go kite flying, you can do that once you're employed and you're continuing on. Okay? The general permit, again, it's the same process. You register, you get 1 year, then you comply by showing you've achieved the salary, you've stayed in employment, you then go on and you get your second year. The difference with the general permit is you must apply for renewal. There's no other way. You have to stay on the stamp 1 permission, but on renewal you'll be issued with a permit for 3 years. So that entitles you to stay then for the total of the 5 years, and only then can you apply for what's known as the stamp 4 permission. Now again, I just revert back to the spouse and partner and dependent. With the critical skills, they can come in immediately. However, with the general permit, your partner or spouse can only join you after 12 months. So that's just to be clear about that there is a difference between the two permits in relation to that. So I just want to briefly touch back on the application process. And anybody who's talking to an employer, or we have employers in the audience, obviously before you look for a permit, you must give a full description of the proposed employment. There has to be a starting date. There has to be an annual remuneration excluding bonuses or any health benefits. Now that figure at the moment is based at €30,000, and that's right across the board, both for general and for the critical skills permit. The only time that changes is when it goes on to the highly paid skills permit of 60,000 a year, and that's based on company directors and, we say, higher end executives of a company. But for the moment, if you're on a general or the critical skills permit, you must work on the basis that it's a minimum salary of 30,000. That's gross, so then you obviously take your taxes out after that. The employer must comply with what's known as the 50-50 rule. So at least 50% of the current employees must be either Irish or European. That's where that comes in, because they have to, it's not just a rule, it's a regulation, and it's governed by legislation as well. So the employee, on their side of it, it must be an occupation that's on the eligible list, whether it's critical skills or general permit, and you must have all the information in relation to qualifications. So it's not just good enough to, you might have a wonderful, let's say a level 8 degree, you might have got grade A honours in that, but you must show the module results for each year, because whilst your degree is an honourable document to have, the Department of Business and Enterprise will want to see the modules that you qualified in on each year, And then also with that is those modules are probably going to be related to the job that you're applying for. If your degree or qualification is not in English, you obviously have to get it certifiably translated so that it can be read in English. And the offer that you get, whether it's critical skills or a general permit, it has to be a minimum of 2 years. And along with that 2 years, you get a contract from your employer. The employer has to issue that contract for 2 years. Otherwise, the permit won't be accepted, or the application for the permit won't be accepted. So it's a 2-year job offer, citing a starting date. The offer starts on the starting date, not the date that the offer is made. So just to be careful of that aspect of it, contract should show the starting date, not the date that the offer is made. And that pretty much concludes what I have to offer. There are other aspects of employment permits, and I know some of you might have questions to ask. And as Ruth said, I prefer to talk to people individually because there might be some personable information that you might not want to give in a public arena. So we're over here at stand number 24. We're open for business, and we look forward to meeting you afterwards. Thanks for your attention and your time.